crazy U.S.A conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. Some conspiracy theories are so ridiculous they're easy to dismiss until they turn out to be true. Not just kind of true, but fully documented, confirmed, and backed by the same government that swore it would never do such things. These aren't wild guesses or paranoid ramblings. These are real operations, signed off and carried out by people in power, often for decades, and often at the expense of innocent lives. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on some of the darkest, strangest, and most unethical government experiments in U.S. history. Because sometimes, reality is far more disturbing than fiction. Number 1. The Tuskegee Study. Free healthcare. It's a hidden agenda. It started with a promise. Free healthcare. Free checkups, free meals, even free burial insurance. All you had to do was show up, roll up your sleeve, and trust the government. This was the Tuskegee Study. And if you're hearing about it for the first time, prepare to be both horrified and incredibly disappointed. In 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service launched a study in Tuskegee, Alabama, to observe the natural progression of untreated syphilis in black men. They didn't announce that publicly, of course. They simply told 600 impoverished African-American men they were receiving treatment for bad blood, a vague, catch-all term for anything from fatigue to anemia. 399 of these men had syphilis. The rest didn't. None of them were told. What the study was really about, none of them gave informed consent. And none of them received actual treatment. Even after penicillin became the standard cure in the 1940s. That's right, the government had the cure and chose not to use it. Instead, they watched. For 40 years, just watched as men got sicker, infected their wives, and had children born with congenital syphilis. Because apparently watching people slowly fall apart was considered valuable data. Why not just tell the men the truth? Why not ask for permission? Well, researchers assumed that poor, uneducated black men wouldn't understand, or worse, that they wouldn't cooperate if they knew. So they lied. They lied in the name of science, wrapped it in public health, and buried it under racial and economic prejudice. And for decades, no one said a word. The study only came to light in 1972, thanks to a journalist named Jean Heller who published an exposé that made national headlines. The public was shocked. The study was immediately shut down. A year later, survivors and their families won a $9.5 million settlement, which sounds generous until you realize that many of the victims never lived to see a dime. And yes, there's a formal apology 25 years later. The Tuskegee Study wasn't a glitch in the system. It was the system. A system that saw human beings as test subjects. A system that exploited trust and poverty. A system that thought ethics were optional if the people you were hurting didn't matter. This wasn't about medicine. It was about control, neglect, and dehumanization. So the next time someone says, just trust the system, remember Tuskegee? Because sometimes what looks like care is really just control in disguise. And sometimes the people promising to heal you are the ones holding the scalpel. Number 2, the Watergate Scandal, the president, the plumbers, and the tape that ruined it all. Power tends to corrupt, they say. And absolute power. Well, that just makes people do really stupid things like bugging your enemy's offices and then lying about it till the entire country watches you implode on live television. This is the story of the Watergate Scandal. A political drama so ridiculous, so messy, and so avoidable, it almost reads like satire. But no, it actually happened. And it took down a sitting president of the United States. Let's set the stage. It's the early 1970s. The Vietnam War is raging, protests are everywhere, and President Richard Nixon is preparing to run for re-election. Nixon is a complicated figure. Brilliant, paranoid, ruthless, insecure. The kind of man who could win in a landslide and still believe the world was out to get him, so. Naturally, he wanted to be absolutely sure that he'd stay in power, and to do that, he needed information. About his enemies, about the opposition, and apparently about what the Democratic Party kept in its office filing cabinets. Enter Creep No. Seriously, that was the acronym. The Committee to Re-elect the President. Sounds like a harmless campaign group, right? Except their campaigning included wiretapping, burglary, and a whole lot of illegal surveillance. On June 17, 1972, 5 men were caught breaking into the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the Watergate office complex in Washington, D.C. Their mission? Plant listening devices, steal documents, and gather dirt. You know, democracy, but make it espionage. These weren't just random criminals. They were connected to Nixon's campaign. One of them had even worked for the CIA. But when they got caught, no one immediately knew who they were working for. The break-in looked suspicious, but at first glance, it was just a bunch of guys in suits with duct tape and wire. Then came the cover-up, because if there's one thing worse than a scandal, it's trying to hide it badly. Behind the scenes, Nixon and his aides were working overtime to make the whole thing disappear. They told the CIA to pressure the FBI into backing off the investigation. They used campaign funds to pay hush money to the burglars. And Nixon went on national TV and denied everything. Repeatedly, meanwhile, 2 journalists from the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, started digging, with the help of an anonymous informant known only as Deep Throat. They slowly uncovered a trail of lies, cash, and corruption that led straight to the White House. The administration insisted it was all nonsense, a distraction. Fake news before that term became a meme, but the evidence kept piling up. Then came the bombshell. In 1973, it was revealed that Richard Nixon had installed a secret taping system in the White House. Every conversation, every meeting, every whispered deal recorded. Why? Maybe for posterity. Maybe for leverage. Maybe because when you're that paranoid, you want receipts on everyone, including yourself. Naturally, when Congress found out, they asked Nixon to turn over the tapes. And Nixon, being Nixon, refused. He claimed something called executive privilege, saying the president had the right to keep conversations private. That might have worked. Except the tapes weren't just private, they were incriminating. One tape in particular, recorded just days after the break-in, revealed Nixon discussing how to obstruct the FBI's investigation. Suddenly, it wasn't about political dirty tricks anymore. It was about abuse of power, obstruction of justice, criminal conspiracy coming straight from the Oval Office. At that point, even Nixon's own party couldn't defend him. The House of Representatives began preparing articles of impeachment. Faced with the inevitable, Nixon did something no other U.S. president had ever done before. On August 8, 1974, he resigned. He didn't admit guilt. He didn't apologize. He just left, and Vice President Gerald Ford stepped in and pardoned him 1 month later. Yes, you heard that right. No trial, no prison. Just a clean slate and a nation left to pick up the pieces. So, what was the big deal, really? Well, the Watergate scandal wasn't just about a break-in. It was about how far a president would go to hold on to power. Quickly, truth can be buried when people in charge think they're untouchable. How fragile public trust really is. It showed that corruption doesn't always wear a villain's mask. Sometimes it wears a suit, smiles for the cameras, talks about law and order, while breaking both behind closed doors. In the aftermath, new laws were passed to limit presidential powers, increase transparency, and protect whistleblowers. But the damage was done. Public's faith in government and the presidency itself had been shattered. What started with a few men sneaking into an office with duct tape and notepads, and ended with the most powerful man in the world stepping down in disgrace. Watergate didn't just change American politics. It introduced a level of skepticism that never really went away. And from that moment on, every scandal had a name ending in gate, which is honestly the least of our problems. And if you think something like this couldn't happen today, well, that's exactly what Nixon thought too. Number 3. Project MKUltra. Mind control. LSD. And a government that forgot the ethics manual. It started, as many disturbing things do, with fear. In the 1950s, America was deep in the Cold War, and panic was the national pastime. But this wasn't just fear of bombs or spies, it was fear of the mind. Specifically, that the communists had figured out how to control it. When American prisoners of war returned from Korea parroting communist slogans and denouncing their own country, it didn't look like politics. It looked like brainwashing. And if the enemy had mind control, the U.S. needed to catch up fast. Enter the CIA. Still a relatively young agency, the CIA had a new obsession: behavioral engineering, or as it would later be called, Project MK-Ultra. Sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, and honestly, it probably should have stayed there. MK-Ultra was designed to explore ways to manipulate the human mind to erase memories, plant new ones, extract confessions, and break people down to their psychological core. The idea was simple. If you could control how a person thinks, you could control what they do. The methods, however, were anything but simple or ethical or sane. Let's start with the basics. From 1953 to 1973. MK-Ultra conducted hundreds of covert experiments on unsuspecting people, most of whom had no idea they were part of a government study. Test subjects included prisoners, psychiatric patients, addicts, and yes, random civilians. The weapon of choice? Yes. The CIA had a phase where they basically became illegal drug dealers, except instead of selling acid at music festivals, they were secretly dosing people and then watching them unravel behind a two-way mirror. One particularly colorful branch of MK-Ultra was called Operation Midnight Climax. No, that's not the title of a bad 80s action film. Here's how it worked. The CIA set up a series of safe houses in San Francisco and New York. These houses were rigged with microphones, cameras, and mirrored glass. Then, they hired prostitutes to lure unsuspecting men back to the location, where they were promptly dosed with LSD without their knowledge and observed by agents hiding behind the walls, clipboards in hand. If it sounds like a twisted social experiment run by people who read too much pulp fiction, that's exactly what it was. But the madness didn't stop there. At the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada, MK-Ultra took on a new level of cruelty. Under the guidance of Dr. Ewan Cameron, patients seeking treatment for mild anxiety or depression were subjected to a technique he called psychic driving. It sounds harmless. It wasn't. Cameron's process involved massive doses of electroshock therapy, induced comas, and looped audio messages played nonstop for days, even weeks. The goal? To break down the person's mind completely, erase their existing personality, and then rebuild them into someone better. In reality, he turned functional adults into hollow shells, childlike, confused, and permanently damaged. And all of it was funded by the CIA. For science, of course, the CIA didn't advertise any of this. MK-Ultra was top secret, and most of the records were deliberately destroyed in 1973 when the project finally came to light. But not everything disappeared. Some documents survived, and a few brave souls began to put the puzzle together. One of them was John Marks, journalist and author who published The Search for the Manchurian Candidate in 1979. His work revealed the sheer scope of MK-Ultra, a program that spanned over 80 institutions, including universities, hospitals, and prisons, all without public oversight. And the results? Well, let's just say the CIA never cracked the mind control code. Despite 2 decades of trials, trauma, and tormented volunteers, MK-Ultra produced 0 reliable methods for extracting secrets or rewiring brains. But what it did produce was a long list of broken people, many of whom never knew why their lives had unraveled. Veterans plagued by nightmares, patients who lost their memories, families torn apart by unexplained mental illness. There was no consent, no warnings, and no apologies. To this day, the full number of victims remains unknown because the agency responsible for the program was also responsible for destroying the evidence. Think about that for a second. A branch of the government ran illegal drug experiments on its own citizens, caused permanent psychological damage, and then erased the paper trail, all in the name of national security. And the kicker? It did. While condemning communist countries for doing the exact same thing. It's the kind of hypocrisy that's almost poetic now, you might ask. Was anyone held accountable? Not really. Some hearings were held, Congress wagged its finger. CIA admitted that mistakes were made, which is government speak for, oops, we tortured people. But no one went to jail. No major heads rolled. And no compensation was ever given to the victims, many of whom never even knew what happened to them. The story of MKUltra isn't just about rogue scientists or shadowy spy masters. About what happens when fear overrides ethics, and when the people in charge value power more than human dignity. It's about how wisely science can be twisted into cruelty when no one is watching, or worse, when those watching are the ones giving the orders. So the next time someone mentions a conspiracy theory that sounds a little too far-fetched, maybe pause for a moment. Because once upon a time, the U.S. government really did run a secret program to control people's minds using psychedelic drugs and psychological torture. And no, this isn't fiction. It's just history. Number 4. The Iran-Contra Affair. Secrets, smuggled missiles. And now. $18 million detour in the 1980s? President Ronald Reagan had one mission: stop communism, anywhere, at any cost. And if that meant secretly selling weapons to a hostile government and funneling the money to drug-funded rebels, well, so be it. This is the Iran-Contra Affair, a scandal so absurd it almost feels made up, except it waltzed. It starts in Nicaragua, where a leftist group called the Sandinistas had taken power. Reagan hated them because communism and wanted to support a rebel group called the Contras. There was just one problem. The Contras were trafficking drugs. And Congress passed a law, the Boland Amendment, banning U.S. support. But the Reagan administration had a workaround. A very illegal, very secret workaround. At the same time, in the Middle East, 7 American hostages were being held by Iranian-backed militants. Officially, the U.S. didn't negotiate with terrorists. Unofficially, they were about to. The deal was simple: sell $30 million worth of weapons to Iran. Use the arms sale as leverage to free the hostages, and then, this is the fun part, divert $18 million of that money to fund the Contras in Nicaragua. Yes, that's right. The U.S. secretly sold missiles to a country it was sanctioning, sent only part of the money to Iran, and funneled the rest to a rebel group they were legally forbidden to support. When the story broke in 1986, thanks to a Lebanese newspaper, it shocked the world. The Reagan administration scrambled. Enter Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, the mastermind behind the operation, who admitted everything and claimed Reagan knew. There were congressional hearings, televised testimonies, and a growing pile of evidence. Reagan, for his part, denied involvement, then claimed he forgot. Convenient in the end, 12 officials were convicted, including North and Reagan's national security advisor. But nearly all were later pardoned. Reagan, despite the scandal, left office with one of the highest approval ratings in U.S. history, because apparently, selling weapons to your enemies and funding cocaine-financed rebels is finance. Long as you smile on TV. The Iran-Contra Affair wasn't just a breach of was a breach of trust. A shadow operation that contradicted everything the administration claimed to stand for. It showed the world that political morality is flexible, and that truth in Washington is often optional. And the most disturbing part? It worked. The hostages were freed. The Contras kept fighting, and democracy just sort of looked the other way. You'd like to think the government exists to protect you, but sometimes the ones meant to guard you are the very ones pulling the strings behind closed doors. These stories aren't meant to scare you. They're meant to wake you up, because the past doesn't stay in the past if no one remembers it. If you want a part 2, let me know in the comments. There are plenty more secrets buried just beneath the surface. Till then, stay curious, stay skeptical, and never assume the official story is the whole story.